transistor had a function. So some transistors were a switching transistor to, turn on and off circuits. Some were amplification, some were RF. I mean, some were all just different things, just like tubes would be. Where the technology took the big jump was from transistors to integrated circuit, where the circuit had multiple circuits in one circuit. That was the big jump in technology. So if that happened, I do buy that part, because we did take a big jump from transistors to integrated circuits. It was like night and day, really fast.
Yeah, and that's some of the debunkers. They like to point out that all of this technology that Corso claimed that he had farmed out to corporations, that there were companies already working on them. Lasers and night vision. I mean, they were working on night vision at the end of World War II. Nazi Germany had been working on night vision. But like you said, it wasn't until really the timeline seems to fit very well. It wasn't until supposedly when Corso took this stuff out and gave it to these companies, Bell Labs, places like that, not telling them that of course that, hey, this came from a crashed UFO, see what you can do with it. It was implied that this was material that was taken from Soviet sources or other foreign countries, and that we needed to figure out what they were doing and how we could reproduce it on our own. And so, yeah, you're very well correct. It was a big jump, an advancement on the earlier, more primitive experiments that were being done with this technology to really a very sophisticated development for the 1960s, considering how it had been just a few years earlier. But I suppose my question is, what about all the other stuff that say like the Air Force or the Navy had gotten a hold of? Because Corso's material, that wasn't the only piece of pie. There was other things, but nobody has come forward to say that we had the same thing and we did such and such. I suppose a dedicated researcher needs to go and take a look at advancements in technology, or after the end of World War II, and see if there is any kind of chronological jump in this technology. When you had say like the laser beam.
Well, the laser. Tim took a big jump. I remember my dad experimenting with lasers in his workshop at home, and he was so proud. Look, at about 4 feet away, I just burned a hole through a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was just ecstatic about that. I mean, he tried burning metal. It wouldn't do it at that point. This wasn't strong enough, at least what he was trying to do with lasers at that time. But now, look at the Navy is claiming they got lasers now that can take out aircraft, can take out a ship. And so is the Army on tanks. That laser can actually take out other, tanks, other, groups of infantry and all that stuff. So in the last 10 years, even laser technology has been advancing way faster than I think it normally should. But hey, who am I?
Well, and if we're publicly talking about that now and have this information now, then guaranteed the technology is at least 10, 25, some people say 50 years ahead of what we're talking about now.
Well, it has,
so if the military
be.
is saying that. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It has to be, because I remember I was a kid, like 10, 11 years old. And here's my dad experimenting with a laser in his shop, burning holes in paper and real thin cardboard. It would take a while, but it actually did it. I mean, and to watch it, it was like, wow. But then to go that far back in, let's say, the 60s to now, it's just like, wow, they have come so far that it's actually scary. And it's just not even laser. It's a lot of this stuff is advancing faster. I mean, even computers, if you think about it, you know, computers back in the late 50s, early 60s would take a massive room, massive amount of tubes, and it basically was dumb as it could be.
Right.
And then, you know, all of a sudden they started coming out with computers that actually did more than play games. And all of a sudden, computer technology is actually, we don't see it as a consumer, but it's doubling every year at this point, the capabilities, at least military-wise.
Yeah, well, look at the computers that were used on the Apollo missions. I'm talking about the computers that were on board the Apollo and the lunar module. Now, you know, here we have spaceship, you know, orbiting the moon, detaching, landing on the moon, all that. The computers used in those spaceships had less memory than our handheld calculators that our kids use at school now.
Isn't that scary? You remember the old Commodore VIC-20 computer?
Oh, yes.
That had way more capability than anything that NASA had, let alone with anything that was used in any of the spacecraft. And that is scary how fast that technology jumped. I watched it because at one point in the mid-'80s, I was designing computer components. And I watched technology it was bizarre how fast it was moving. As fast as you would design something, it was already obsolete.
Mm-hmm. Well, and because of that, I think that's why a lot of people are convinced that the stories of Corso and some of the others that advanced technology has been fed into our society from an extraterrestrial source. You know, albeit probably the most primitive of this extraterrestrial technology, because it's still way too far advanced for most of it to be understood. But still, it's an ongoing process that is, you know, and really, I mean, you can trace a lot of this back to the end of World War II, possibly, you know, and again, you know, the Roswell crash. I hate to keep using that one because there's still a lot of debate on exactly what came down at Roswell, but there does seem to be a quickening, so to speak, after 1947 when it comes to advanced technology along these lines.
Well, could some of this advanced technology been credited with Germany from World War II, some of the technology they were coming up with?
Yes. Well, and that was going to be my next point. You look at the possible advancement and development of anti-gravity technology or field propulsion. You know, I mean, Nikola Tesla, back in the early 20th century, had worked and was in the process of developing theories on field propulsion or anti-gravity. A lot of that probably ended up in Nazi Germany's hands from the East Coast spy ring that stole that from Tesla. But then you had, in the 1950s especially, there were a lot of magazine articles, peer-reviewed papers coming out talking about how the next big thing was going to be anti-gravity, and that the citing a number of different laboratories and research organizations that were just, this close to making that big breakthrough. And then all of a sudden, it just all stopped. All these articles, all of these peer-reviewed papers, at least publicly, disappeared. It was like there was this big clampdown on information. So I think that sometime, probably around 1960, there was a breakthrough when it comes to anti-gravity technology. Now, interesting enough, Corso said that the military had actually developed kind of like a rudimentary form of anti-gravity based on the material that was found from not only Roswell, but I guess a couple of other UFO crashes. But unfortunately, the only available power source that they had that was powerful enough, energetic enough, would have been like using a nuclear reactor, which made it wildly not improbable. I mean, it did work, but it it spewed radiation all over the place. If you shielded it enough, it made it way too heavy. So, I mean, it didn't work very well. All right, now take that and step it forward 50 years. If they were able to come up with something like that, at least in a rough primitive form using a nuclear reactor in 1960, what do we have now?
That would be scary. I think if we only knew what was out there. And, I don't know. Again, are the UFOs, are they coming from another dimension? Are they coming from a parallel universe or another solar system, or from time? Back or forward in time? Nobody seems to know.
Well, that's it's interesting that you would say that, because Corso hinted not too long before he died that UFOs could actually be time machines. I'm trying to remember if he actually said much about it in his book. I don't know, but his son. Well, and in fact, I remember seeing an interview with a mainstream network with Corso when his book came out. And just as an aside, he said to the reporter, next time we talk, I'll tell you about the time machine. And then, of course, not too long afterwards, he passed away.
Yeah, he had a major heart attack, and that was it.
It was the second one, yeah. Now, his son, Phil Corso Jr., says that his dad told him that he thought that the Roswell craft, that was the one that he was most familiar with, was a time machine. Was a time machine that he thought was from our future. He also said that the craft was more organic than metallic or electronic, that it was something that was actually grown and had a mind of its own, so to speak, almost like a biological machine. He said it was like laced with crystal electronics, and that the creatures that flew it were also not man-made, but they were constructs. They were biological constructs by whatever. That they were not the original, aliens or people from the future or whatever. They were developed specifically to fly these craft, and that they were artificial beings, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And that he felt that they were artificial intelligence from our own future, and that he speculated that the